Second episode of the PDT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Smith, sports editor at the Daily Times. I got the chance to sit down with former Portsmouth coach Tom Smith as our guest for the second episode. In addition to having a great last name, Coach Smith coached the Trojan basketball program for 6 seasons from 1982 to 1987. He won 3 district championships and finished with a record of 108-35, good enough for the 4th best winning percentage in PHS basketball history. Smith is now a color commentator for Portsmouth games for WNXT Radio. It's a shorter interview than what we were able to do with Coach Miller, but there's a lot of substance to what Coach Smith relays, so I hope you, the audience, are able to enjoy it as much as I did. On to the episode. All right, happy to be joined by our second guest on the PDT Sports Podcast. He was the Portsmouth basketball coach from 1982 to 1987, 3-time district champion coach of the Trojans basketball team. He was also a teacher-turned-administrator here at the Portsmouth School District. During his time as head coach, compiled a record of 108-35 as the Trojans head coach. Coach Tom Smith, thanks for joining me, Coach.
Thank you very much. I listened to your last podcast and enjoyed it, and I'm excited and honored to be here with you.
Well, I appreciate it. After having my first episode, I knew that I wanted my second episode really to focus on Portsmouth basketball, some of the history behind it. Obviously, that's not the easiest thing to do in one episode, and I'd be foolish to try. That's 100 years of basketball history we're talking about. But I asked Portsmouth Athletic Director Joe Albrecht, who he thought might be a good guest to talk Trojan hoops. He directed me to you, and it just so happened to be the night of the Rock Hill game when Matt Ferlini scored his 1,000th point. So we just happened to be there at the same night, got to talking, and you agreed to come on. So I appreciate you doing that. Appreciate you joining me to talk some Trojan basketball.
Well, absolutely. 100 years is obviously a long time, and even though I feel like I've been around for every one of those 100 years, that's not quite the case. But a lot of tradition here at Portsmouth High School.
Just to start, how did you get your start in coaching? Was it something you knew you always wanted to do?
Jacob, it's kind of funny. I look back, and I guess I really started coaching when I was a little tiny kid. We had a little rim in our backyard that was only about 8 feet high, and couldn't even use a real basketball because it was not a real rim. We used a real light ball, and when my friends would come over, I would be the coach of our team, and also a player. I was a player coach in that time at home, and so I think really back then is when I really kind of thought, hey, I kind of like telling these guys what to do and playing the game. My formal coaching actually began at Rock Hill Junior High School. It was my second year teaching at Rock Hill, and Sam Hall was the head coach at Rock Hill at that time, and he asked me if I'd like to have the freshman team at Rock Hill, and I jumped on it. We only won one game that year, so it was a breaking in, I guess you'd say. It wasn't a great season, but nonetheless we had a good time and had good kids, but that's where it started, at Rock Hill back in 1975, 1976.
You were a player here at Portsmouth. Like we kind of joked earlier, you said you sat the bench, which I thought was funny.
Yeah.
A year later became an assistant under Coach Hopkins before taking the head coaching job in the 81-82 season. How did you get your start with the Portsmouth program? How long were you an assistant?
Well, I was at Rock Hill, as I said, and Dick Hopkins, his son Rick, who of course later became a Portsmouth coach, he had an opening, and I think he talked to Rick about who some young guys were that Rick might recommend, and Rick and I were friends, and he recommended me to his father, and I came down and talked to him and became the JV coach at Portsmouth for a couple years, and then was the varsity assistant under Dick, and he's the one, I guess, that I would credit. If I have any accolades to be given, it would be because of what Dick Hopkins did for me by bringing me to Portsmouth in the 76-77 school year.
You take over in 1982 and win 3 district championships in the 6 years that you were the coach. Some coaches are lucky enough to win 1 district championship, so you obviously a lot of success in your time here. When you first take over, was it tough to follow Coach Hopkins and the success that you guys had as a staff, or were you kind of expecting yourself the success that you guys had for the team because of the groundwork you guys laid?
Yeah, I think without a doubt. I remember in the interview process, one of the questions was what are you going to do differently? And to be honest with you, I told them, and I would maintain that today. Obviously, a person has their own individual characteristics and personality to put into a coaching situation. But with the success that Dick had here, I said in the interview, and I maintain today, I don't see much sense in changing things when you had the tremendous success that we had and Coach Hopkins had. I didn't see much need to do things any different. Again, you have your own little twists as a coach that you might throw in there because of simply your personality. But why fix a wheel if it's not broken?
How high of an expectation was there for you guys as a team and the program as you took over?
It was extremely high. As a matter of fact, probably the reason why I got out of it was that I didn't feel that I was meeting the expectations that the fans and the community had. 108-35 is a tremendous record looking back on it, and I think many coaches would be happy with 108-35, but we simply didn't go to the state tournament, and of course we'd been there, had won the state tournament back in '78 and had some undefeated teams and state-ranked teams. But sadly enough, we were never able to get to the state. And the fans, I think, at that time had very, very high expectations. And when I couldn't meet those expectations as a coach, I'll be honest with you, I started hearing people in the stands. I started questioning my own ability. I left prematurely, I guess one might think, because the year after I left, Trojans won the state. So we had Coach Suboticki didn't have a bare cupboard by any means when he came in, but we just probably at that time, I wouldn't use the word spoiled, but I think that the expectations, as you alluded to, were just so very, very high, and quite honestly, I wasn't able to meet those expectations.
Any of the three district championships teams that you were the coach for stick out when I ask for your favorite or the best of the three?
Yeah. No, I think, looking back on it, the expectations were that you were going to win the district anyhow, and so it wasn't like any of those were particularly experiences that were just over the top. Like I say, the expectations were simply there, and we had some great seasons and we had some great kids, but I don't think that there's any one of those particular teams that stand out, with the exception of the very last one where we were, I think, 22-3 or something in that last year. That was an exceptional year, obviously.
You coach now Portsmouth coach Eugene Collins in his junior and senior seasons, which also happened to be your first 2 years as the head coach. And in the '83 season, it's in the book. Let me see. The Portsmouth Trojans, a century of basketball excellence by Dave Maynard, also known as Trojan Dave, helps keep up with a lot of the history here at Portsmouth, and especially with Portsmouth basketball. In the '83 season, you guys win 61-60 against Columbus East off a game winner from Collins. Trojan Dave alludes to that as one of the craziest scenes in Trojan basketball history that he remembered, especially in the old gym. So just how does that game and Collins in particular stand out when thinking of your time here?
Oh, that particular play is one that we had drawn up, and we ran what we called emergency scores weekly, and especially the day before a game. And Gene just went to the corner, and whoever was filming the game, wherever they were located at, when Gene hit that shot in the corner, the people in front stood up and were yelling and screaming. And I tell you what, and I have no reservations about that. That shot that Gene made couldn't have come to a nicer guy, to a more classy guy, and he continues to be nice and continues to have that class today. Eugene was so much fun to coach. I wasn't a whole lot older than those guys, really, to be honest with you. And since that time, at that time it was a coach-player relationship, but since then it's become a friend-friend relationship. But that shot that the old lefty hit there in the corner certainly is one of the highlights that I've enjoyed as a coach.
safe to say Wheelersburg, maybe one of your guys' biggest rivals at the time. You guys beat them in the regular season in the 81-82 season, beat them in the district title in 83, and then have them beat you in the district title in 84. So safe to say they're one of your guys' biggest rivals at the time.
Absolutely, no doubt. And, that last one, in which Wheelersburg beat us was certainly a bitter loss. For a lot of reasons. But yes, Wheelersburg, even at that time, was a huge rival. At that time, they were still, I think, the pride or the talk of the SOC, and of course we weren't in the SOC. And so to beat them when we did, it seemed like almost, and maybe the facts wouldn't back this up, but it seems like we won the games that we weren't supposed to win sometimes, and they in turn beat us in some of the games that perhaps we should have won. The last loss there was a bitter one because we had a lead and we had a couple mental mistakes, and Wheelersburg, in typical Wheelersburg fashion, never, ever gives up, and they didn't in this case, and they ended up knocking us off. I remember in the state tournament, they were down in a game, and I was sitting next to some people for the opposing team, and they said, well, this one's over. And I said, hey, I'm going to tell you something right now. Don't ever count Mike Lovenguth and the Wheelersburg Pirates, and of course, going back to John Eaton and all of those teams, they just have a lot of tradition up there. And so, yes, that would have been one of our biggest rivals, the Pirates.
You start 4 sophomores in 86, a group, like as you alluded to, would go on to win the state championship for Coach Sabaticki in 1988. Did you know at the time when you started them the promise that group might have one day?
No, not really, because even though we had been to the state with Dick, the state, I mean, there's just so many things, Jacob, that has to happen. You have to be good, number one. Nobody makes it to the state tournament that's no good. But number two, you have to have some luck along the way. And so anybody, in my opinion, who gets to the state tournament has to be really good, but they have to have some luck along the way. When we won the state tournament in 1978, we had closer games in the sectional and the district than we did in the regional and up until the state. So much local intensity, I think. When you get to the regional, you don't know the people you're playing. I won't say you don't have respect for them. You're just not overwhelmed by them or overawed by them. You know they're good if they get there. But to say, projecting ahead, I think this is a state tournament team, that was beyond really what I anticipated. Obviously they were good, but to say, I see these people at the state, and that's what the community, I think, told those kids too, which is good in some respects, not so good in others. But those kids, I think, were groomed. We're going to make it to the state. And then, I resigned, and Coach Sabaticki had a different style, the way that he played the game. And as much as I'd like to say I would have taken him to the state too, I deep down I just don't believe that. Coach Sabaticki's style of basketball was press and in your face and run, and that really suited our kids. I probably was more of a slow down, take your time, patient kind of person, and that can lead to teams not as good as you, sometimes beating you. But those were, and you know what, Jacob, I guess the thing I can say about those kids too is not only were they good basketball players, I was blessed as a head coach and as assistant coach to have good quality guys like the Eugene Collinses and the Kyle Taylors and others that are just good guys, solid guys, hard-working guys, and that was what the pleasure was.
And now Portsmouth is obviously in the OVC, but you coached Portsmouth at the time when they were in the Ohio-Kentucky Athletic Conference, the OKAC. It disbanded in the early mid-'90s when Ohio went to the class system, I believe. Some of the teams, for those that might not know, that were in the OKAC, it was Portsmouth, Ironton, Greenup County, Russell, Ashland, Boyd County. Any others that I left out?
No, prior to that was the Tri-State League that included Huntington and Barbersville and Huntington East. But yes, the OKC, I think you hit them all. And you know what? Those are that was a great, tough league. I guess with the exception of Boyd and Greenup, of course, with the name county. But the others are associated with small towns, and I think there's something neat about small towns. But then when you throw in Greenup County that must have 1 million square miles in their school district, and Boyd County, just right outside of Ashland, that was a really, really tough and competitive league. And I think it was a great league in that we were close. When the Huntington and Barbersville schools got out of it, the biggest trip was, Boyd County. So you can get there in 45 minutes, which was different than what Portsmouth was used to, because at one time we weren't in a league and we were going to Dayton and Cincinnati and Columbus regularly. And so to get into a league and for our kids to get a chance for league recognition, I just thought was such a plus. When you're an independent, there's nothing for the kids unless it's the state level or the district level. But when you're in a league, you get the chance to compete for something as the year goes on, and the kids have an opportunity to pick up some individual accolades that they so richly deserve. That was a tough league. With Greenup and Russell and Ashland and Boyd and Ironton. It was a tough league.
Was it the night in, night out, just going up against the different teams? Was that the hard part of it, or did you see any of the schools stick out as your biggest rivals at the time, or what was it about the night in, night out?
Well, I think part of the good thing about that league was that I always liked to beat Ironton. But I had a lot of respect for Ironton, that if Ironton was playing other people, I didn't have a problem rooting for Ironton. So I wanted to beat them as badly as anybody, but I also wanted them to win whenever they were playing somebody else. Ashland and Boyd were a little bit further away, and great basketball programs at Ashland and Russell and Boyd County. But there was a special rivalry, I think, with Randy Ward and Greenup County. Right across the river. Randy had some tremendous teams when he was coaching there. Huge gym. It seemed like when we went to Greenup, we were playing in the OU Convocation Center. It just seemed like a huge building. And the atmosphere at Greenup, when we were at Greenup, and the atmosphere at Portsmouth when we were at Portsmouth, it could get kind of heated. And so I always enjoyed playing Greenup County and playing Randy Ward, perhaps more than some of the other Kentucky schools, because I would run into Randy, at a local store. I never ran into the Russell coach or the Boyd coach or the Ashland coach. So getting to play Greenup and just right down the road, I mean, we could be there in 25 minutes. It was neat. And to walk into that huge old gymnasium and like I say, the atmosphere was pretty antagonistic at times.
I'm partial to the Greenup Portsmouth old school rivalry, old stories from those playing days. My dad played under Coach Ward at Greenup, who, like you said, you coached against whenever you were the coach here at Portsmouth. I know Coach Ward also likes to slow it down, like to grind out games, and I've also heard that the gyms at times between Greenup and Portsmouth would get pretty heated. So yeah. I was interested to hear your thoughts on that rivalry.
It was funny to watch Randy when he was coaching Mike Scott. Randy, not a very tall gentleman, and Mike Scott, I guess, around 7 foot or whatever, and Randy would be giving Mike down the road at a timeout, and I remember thinking, Randy, be careful, that guy could pound you into the ground like a nail if he wanted to. But Randy was he slowed things down a lot, and I oftentimes would say, boy, Randy, if I had your team, I'd do a little bit more running. Well, then people in turn would tell me, Tom, if I had your team, I'd do a little more running. So, but I really enjoyed the clashes that I had with Randy Ward. And to this day, when we see each other, we'll reminisce about games that we had. And Jacob, Randy and I had a mutual respect for each other, and that's what I saw really in all of the OKAC games, that we were fierce competitors, but we respected each other as coaches.
I just wanted to get into some general questions and discussion topics to kind of pick your brain. Who are some of the best players you coached while here at Portsmouth?
as an assistant, I was able to watch Craig Tubbs and Jeff Lizeth play, and really all the guys that were on the state tournament team. That particular team, we mentioned about how you get there. We had people that did different things and were role players. We had Tom Bowden who was a great assist player. Didn't care if he scored. He'd hit 4 or 6 points maybe a game, but he was more interested in dishing it off and playing good defense. We had people like Burrows, who was just a big bulk inside. I guess what I'm trying to say is those guys filled the roles that they were expected to fill. But as far as individuals, I'd have to put Craig Tubbs and Jeff Lizeth up there. Patrick Tubbs, I was surprised to see the list of the 1,000-point scorers, and Patrick wasn't on that list. I would have thought that he would have been that way. But those guys, I think, would probably be the ones. And when I look back on this podcast, I'm going to say, boy, I wish I would have said so and so and so. But I think those guys stick out in my mind as being the players that I can recall. As a kid growing up, I was able to watch Larry Heisel and Al Oliver play. And to this day, Larry Heisel, maybe it's because I was a kid, but he was the best player that I ever saw in a Portsmouth uniform. He could shoot and rebound and play defense, handle the ball. He was just a complete package, and he always was assigned the other team's best player. And so Larry Heisel, I didn't coach him, but Larry's probably the one that sticks out in my mind. But boy, how can you throw away a Scotty Taylor or a Jeff Lizeth or a Craig Tubbs or Patrick Tubbs, Dominic McKinley, the Barnes brothers? The list goes on in terms of the people that I coached. And being on the radio, I've been able to see a lot of the guys play, since I left, and so it's been a blessing to get to see those kids. Gene, I think, told me the other day that 5 maybe on the list of 9 people who have scored 1,000 points he coached. So I think that's what he told me. So, you look back at that, and there's been a lot of people been able to score just in the last few years.
How about the best players you coached against?
Some of the Well, Mike Scott, of course, from Greenup was just a force that nobody could stop, I don't think. I think some of the kids that we played, and their name escapes me now, but Dayton Dunbar came down, and they had some tremendous players when they were here. Again, the name escapes me, but there was a big kid that in our final game that we could not stop. I guess that's one of those questions that the old man's just fumbling at this time.
That's all right, no worries. How has coaching changed most from today to when you were here?
I think it's obvious that the game has become much quicker, much more pressing and in your face, and that's why I think Coach Sabaticki had such a great success here. He kind of turned things around. It was kind of ahead of his time for our kind of area. I think it's a much more fast-paced game, but then I think ultimately it's the 3 that's different than when I coached. If the kids had taken some of the shots that they take today, I would have benched them, because it obviously was only worth 2 points back then. But I think that's the biggest change is coaching the 3, where now they have plays to set up the 3. Well, that would have blown my mind to shoot that long of a shot, to have a play to set up that. No, you set up plays for a layup or a 10-foot jumper. Now they're setting up plays for a 3-point shot. So I think without a doubt that's the biggest thing.
Does the difference in attendance at today's high school games worry you? Some games get like that today, but I see pictures from games even just 10, 15 years ago, and it's drastically different than your typical Friday night game today.
I hate that, and I don't know whether there's too many other things to do, or I hate that. And obviously your memory sometimes isn't all that accurate, but I remember at least my thoughts are that the gym across the street was packed for games and loud and boisterous. And we would go into places like Greenup, and even though it was a big gym, they had a good crowd there and they were loud. I believe some of that is missing, and I can't put my finger on it as to why that is. But boy, I sure relish it when two communities do get together for a game, and it's loud and standing room only. And we see those once in a while, but not like I think that it used to be. Again, I can't put my finger on why, but I do miss that.
I want to wrap things up with you. I really appreciate your time. Just one last question. When the coaching side comes out of you and you see Johnny freshman, whoever it might be on the JV team, if you could give them one piece of advice to work at until they graduate to be the best player that they can be, what would that be?
Wow. I think maybe the biggest thing that I would tell them is to soak up what their coaches tell them. And I think sometimes that's what I see. I see in timeouts. I'll see the guys that aren't playing, maybe not goofing around, but definitely not paying attention. And I always felt that if the coach was telling somebody else, this is what you need to do, that even though he was directing his comments to that player, that also applied to me. And I think sometimes the fellas aren't open to listening to what other coaches or what the coaches are telling other players. If they tell another player, use your left hand when you're on the left side of the basket, and they're telling that person that, not directly to me, then I shouldn't have to have that coach 5 minutes later tell me the same thing. I should have picked up when they were coaching the other players what they needed to do. So I would just hope that players would listen to what their coaches have to say, and then we have to hope and pray that their coaches are knowledgeable and good coaches. But sometimes I think that the kids need to just soak up all the knowledge that they can and apply what is being told to others to themselves.
Well, Coach Smith, I really appreciate you sitting down and having the opportunity to talk some Trojan basketball with me and talk about your time here. It's been a pleasure.
I really thank you, Jacob. And good luck on your other podcasts.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
If you're not already following us, here's how to do so. On Facebook, you can search Portsmouth Daily Times Sports. On Instagram and Twitter, you can follow @PDT Sports _. And on Twitter, you can follow myself @Jacob Smith, PDT, or Sports Reporter Paul Boggs @Boggs Sports.